Hello, we are ready to start. I think we need a second mic. Can you hear me? No? Yes.
Yes.
This should be a little bit more sensitive. Can you hear me?
All right, we are going to get started. Thank you so much for taking your seats.
I'll put 2 mics on. Okay. I turned it on purpose because it's mine is now it's working. Okay, this is better. Hello, everybody. My name is Alexandra Giese. I'm a member of this parliament for the Greens from Germany. I work on digital affairs. I worked on the Digital Services Act, on the Eurostack, and I think, like all of you here in the room, I'm mainly a fighter for democracy in the digital age. And I would like to welcome you all very, very warmly to today's conference, which will feature a very special keynote speaker, Maria Ressa, whom I will introduce in a few minutes. The Vice President of the European Parliament, Nikos Stefanoutzis, sends his regards. He would have been very, very honored to be here to welcome you, especially our distinguished guest, Maria, today, but a family emergency prevents him from joining us today. Our focus today is AI, big tech, and media freedom. And I would like to start with a very personal note, with one issue that is disturbing me very deeply, and that is our failure to imagine a world without free media. I don't know about you, but I'm a very privileged person. I grew up in a free world, and I haven't spent a day of my life where I did not have access to free media. And I really appreciated that because lately I was talking to a person about how urgent the fight we are leading is. And he said, you know, I have an advantage over you. I grew up in Argentina during the dictatorship. I don't need to imagine a world without freedom. I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. And the problem I think we have today is that many people in Brussels, all over the Western world where these decisions are taken, share my privilege. And these are the people we really need to shake. Because if we fail in our struggle, we could soon find ourselves living in a world without free media in a very, very short time. And we must confront this reality head on, not to be depressed, but to make sure that we change the course of things and ensure that free media not only survive, but thrive. And this afternoon, we will explore with Maria a number of key aspects. And I would like to begin with one particular area, a very precise suggestion that the European Commission could address as early as tomorrow morning. Because here we are not sitting here finding solutions for complicated problems to implement in 5 or 10 years or to do an intellectual exercise. We're here to make sure that the solutions we already have get implemented. So one example, the prevailing principle behind most social media platforms today is engagement-based ranking. That means that content that elicits fear, anger, outrage, inflammatory, borderline content outperforms content that adheres to journalistic standards. Accurate reporting must present facts, multiple viewpoints, and the complexities of the world, rather than a simplistic black and white narratives relying on rumors or outright falsehood to get people to engage. Consequently, media outlets that uphold journalistic integrity, embrace complexity, and strive for truth are systematically suppressed, disadvantaged, discriminated by these algorithms. And that practice breaches the Digital Services Act. Article 34 and 35 clearly require platforms to assess and mitigate any actual or foreseeable negative effects on civic discourse, electoral processes, freedom of expression, and media freedom. Article 35 very specifically mandates that mitigation measures include adapting the design of algorithmic and recommender systems, among others. And the issues that we will discuss and examine this afternoon show how serious the current and foreseeable risks to civic discourse, elections, freedom of expression, and media freedom already are, and how quickly media freedom and democracy are eroding. So the European Commission must act right now and stop being intimidated by the US government. This is why we worked for years on this legislation. And if we don't use it, we are undermining democracy twice. Once, because we don't use all the instruments that we already have to protect it. And secondly, because citizens lose faith in our capacity to do so. Because when I go home to Germany, when I go home to my constituency, when I speak anywhere to normal people, they are extremely concerned and they understand very, very well what's going on. And they're asking us to fix this. So my core message is very simple. I do not want us to leave this room feeling overwhelmed, convinced that the tech giants are invincible, that we are destined to lose. I hear the fear and the pain that many of us defending democracy experience today. But I want us to leave this room confident that although the challenges are daunting, we are strong. European democracy already possesses legislation capable of confronting these threats. Our shared values run deep, and a vast majority of citizens across our nations stand up for democracy and free press. They're just asking us to do that and to use the power we have. So what we need to do is to mobilize the people in power who can activate these tools. And I think that together and with the great help of Maria, we can make this happen. Thank you very much. I would like to hand it over to Courtney Radge, who will moderate the afternoon, and to say a few words of introduction on behalf of Open Markets Institute.
Thank you so much. My name is Courtney Radge. I'm the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty at Open Markets Institute, and we're really delighted to be here. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for hosting us on the second day of our conference, co-hosted with Article 19, The Future of Democracy, Speech, Thought, Sovereignty, and Power in the Age of AI. We are at a moment when the world's information systems are being rewritten by a convergence of artificial intelligence and platform powers and state capture that will affect who gets to speak, how loud they can speak, who gets to hear them, and what gets to be said. We have some tools, as you heard from Alexandra, about that we can use. Maria has uncovered so much of what we know about the algorithmic manipulation of our system, but we are now on a new precipice with a new set of challenges that intensifies the existing old ones, but also raises a lot of new ones. This isn't only a question of technology, it's a question of governance, of rights, of the public's ability to know what is true, and of the political will to do something about it. Because around the world, journalists are not just documenting these shifts, they are living them. And we are therefore living them as citizens in democracies. In some countries, they also face prison or exile. We know from Maria's own experience. And I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Maria for maybe about 12 years or so, maybe 15, since running the Hold the Line campaign, which was our slogan before it became a right-wing slogan in the United States. And we had a big debate over whether we should, revise the name of that. But we said, no, we're not going to give in to the manipulation of the information environment. We're holding the line. Maria has held the line for years. She is the foremost expert on these issues. And I think we have to recognize that as the threat from unfettered AI scraping not only undermines the economic conditions of journalism, the information industries, the creative industries, and humanity, it is also pumping AI junk into the information system that is drowning out the ability to get that quality content. And so this question about prevalence, about prominence, about visibility becomes even more intense. So today's conversation is about reclaiming agency in that system and ensuring that technology serves the public interest and not just private political power. And we're going to hear from Maria. We're then going to have a brief fireside chat and open it up to some questions, but I'm going to ask you to keep your questions brief and not make comments because we really want to hear Maria's perspective. And I know that a lot of you here might not have had the opportunity to interact, so I want to take a few questions. And then we're going to go to a panel with colleagues to delve into some of the issues and what this means for media freedom. So thank you all for joining us, and back to you, Alexandra.
Thanks a lot, Courtney. So it is my privilege to introduce Maria, who doesn't need an introduction, but I just wanted to say a few personal words. The first time we met was in 2022. It was in Oslo. It was a panel conference in your honor, the Freedom of Expression Conference, very tellingly. And you said words that shocked me and that I have repeated since, I don't know how many times, to open my own speeches. And you said 2024 could be the year that democracy could end globally. And I remember the audience just going quiet and freezing and saying, well, that's not possible. And when we look around now, I'm still shocked by her incredible foresight. 2025, looking back at that, you were so right, unfortunately. At the same time, you're working tirelessly and fearlessly to make sure this doesn't happen, and this is why we're here today. You're Nobel Peace Prize laureate 2021, together with Dmitry Muratov, for your efforts to safeguard freedom of expression, which is a precondition for democracy and lasting peace. You're a journalist, you're the founder of Rappler, your prominent critique of the then Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte. You endured arrests and a politically motivated conviction, fighting for press freedom with an incredible courage and for a long time under the threat of spending years and years in prison. And I don't know how you did that, but I spoke about the privilege of not having lived that before, and I really feel that you did that. You're a professor at the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia University and a distinguished fellow at Columbia's Institute for Global Politics. And you're the author of 3 award-winning books, among them the last one, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, which I think is a book we should all read to be prepared. And above all, you were one of the first journalists to do really pioneering work to use social media to reach people directly, but also the first one to describe how Facebook in particular uses its system, its data practices, its targeting practices, its algorithmic practice to spread lies and disinformation, serving the best interests of dictators rather than democracy. And allow me another personal note. The last time you came to an event of mine in the European Parliament, it was a similar room like that, and was a grey Brussels day. And the moment you walked into that room, it was the end of the conference, was like, 5:50, and everybody was waiting to leave, and you finally came into the room, you walked in, and the sun made this enormous appearance, and the whole room was bathed in light. It was a really incredible thing. And since then, in my mind, you're always the woman who brings the light, the warmth, and the energy of the sun into the room. Thank you so much for that. We're looking forward to your keynote speech, and you have the floor. Thank you. You need your...
Yeah, you're leaving me.
Oh no.
Yeah, okay. They're leaving me.
We give you the whole...
And I kind of liked it because this is the time when I'm as tall as Alexandra. Yeah, no, it's okay. It's cool. And of course, so there's so many faces in the room. I have to say thank you. I am not in jail partly because of all the work you've done on our behalf. And, we always need to pay it forward. Let me start. Can you click the presentation? Thank you. Facts, truth, trust. I'm going to say 3 things. I'm going to be very geeky, and I'm going to ask you to think slow through most of the presentation. It's going to be bleak at the beginning and middle, but there's 3 solutions at the end, and we're working really hard at it. It kind of dovetails with some of the work that you're doing now. Of course, the EU has the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, and I'll echo the same thing that Alexandra said. Facts, truth, trust. I've said this for almost a decade, and it is because of the design of social media, right, which is the first one. And I'll take you through the tech. None of the technology that rules our lives today, none are anchored in facts, right? So think about that. The public information ecosystem, everything in the physical world is pushed into the virtual world, and yet the tech that governs that does it for profit. That's the first. So I talk a lot about... you heard from Courtney about agency. I actually will have data for you that shows we've lost agency without really realizing that. I think that at the UN, to kick it off this year, I said that information integrity, distinguishing fact from fiction, information integrity is the mother of all battles. Because if we lose that, we lose everything. right? If we win that, then we can begin to tackle science, vaccines, climate change. Information integrity is the core. And the three sentences I've said over and over and over in the last decade, I first said it in Silicon Valley in 2016. Without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these three, we don't have a shared reality. You can't solve any problem, let alone those existential ones I've mentioned. All right, we're going to go through, and part of it, please forgive me if I'm like jumping all over the place. I actually want to be as tall as Alexandra. All right, doesn't work. How do I? There! Is that you or me? Okay. Either way, it will work. So we're all talking about artificial intelligence like it's a new thing, but it's been around for a very long time, since 1956, actually. And as today, it is a marketing term. It is not artificial, nor is it intelligent. And there have been many different branches of this technology that have been around. But this term now is applied to the branch that has gotten the most funding, right? Tens of billions of dollars is the one that says if you feed it everything, then it will be accurate. Well, that's also not true, and I'll take you through that. But the second one is all of it is anchored on the toxic surveillance model, right? Shoshana Zuboff didn't give a name to it until 2019 when she published The Surveillance Capitalism. Let me take you through. Ooh, it worked. This is when it began, right? We didn't think it was a big deal, right? We went from Excel sheets to big data. But guys, this was the beginning. When it went to information, I mean, it was really nice to have Airbnb or Spotify. Music was the first that was disrupted, right? Think about all the disruptions. Spotify, you have Airbnb. What's the second one? Airbnb is hotels. Uber. Yes. Yeah, Lyft, Uber and Lyft, right? So this is huge. We've changed the world by pumping more, right? So think about it like that and look at the world differently. In the Nobel lecture in 2021, I said that we are standing on the rubble of the world that was, right? And the good part about that is if you accept that, then you can build. And that's the fun part. The two tech, and I'll quickly go through them. Courtney, you should tell me when I'm like at 35 minutes. Okay, Jack, you got it, because I want to make sure we have Q&A. So nope, back. Thank you. Social media, let's just make sure we're all on the same page, right? Because on your cell phone, does anyone here not have a cell phone? Is anyone here not on social media? Okay, that means all of us in this room, machine learning came in to build a model of every one of us. A model, replace that word model, because that model has 2,338 plus big data sets. That's from Consumer Reports in 2023, in addition to the relationship data that a company like Facebook would have, right? So they say machine learning came in and built a model of us. Replace the word model with clone. Right? We have been digitally cloned in the virtual world, and then artificial intelligence, one of those things, came in, took all our clones, and that became the motherlode database for micro-targeting. Right? Micro-targeting is not the old advertising. The reason why it has better ROIs is because it takes your weakest moment to a message and feeds you advertising, feeds you the message that will move you, right? So that's the social media parts, and there are many more. TikTok, significantly worse because it doesn't even need the relationship data. It just feeds you the most, what's the right word? It feeds you the most, it feeds you content that overwhelms, right? So that's social media. Generative AI, there's several different branches, and there's some good stuff that's being done with generative AI. But if you are using the ones that are consumer-driven, it is at best 16% error rate, right? Let's call a spade a spade. The error rate is at best 16%, at worst 79%. Imagine if you're using that for a paper. That's why it makes up those footnotes, right? So But here's the other part with generative AI. Sora 4, who's used Sora 2, Sora 4? If you've used it, you can now see that they can make a deep fake of any of us in the room, and you will not be able to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't, right? Significantly worse. So, this is just going over the addictive parts, which I think all of you in the room know, so I'm going to go through this really fast. Designed after the casino slot machines, you pull opportunity, you get unpredictable rewards, and then you do it again. It's mildly addictive. It's why we kind of binge watch. It's the stuff that gets you these rewards. But look at the impact. One more time. There. So look at the impact on the personal. We now know Vivek Murthy came up with all of there have been so much done on the impact on our kids. But beyond that, the epidemic of loneliness, that's Vivek Murthy's going out. He has a new book coming out soon. And then the other part, that's personal at the individual levels for each of us. But the sociological, we behave differently in groups. So you take the Solomon Asch studies where 75% of us will follow the group. That's really bad, but imagine the other part, 25% will not, right? So the sociological parts, we behave differently in groups. That's part of the reason that we've had a gladiators battle to the death in our politics. And then the last part is we haven't done enough studies on emergent human behavior. How is this changing us as a species? Because it is. That's why the next generation is different. This is designed to be addictive. It has an effect on the neuroplasticity of our brains. There's a study that came out a few years ago that said that if you are having an intense conversation, if Quinn and I are having an intense conversation, and my cell phone keeps kind of buzzing in my pocket, we're going through, and I take it and I look down, and I put it back, it'll take me 20 minutes to get back to that same level of intensity. Every time you interrupt, and we live a life of interruptions, the neuron that should be going straight turns right. And over time, with so many interruptions, that neuron begins to turn right on its own, right? It's like Pavlov's dogs. Okay, so facts, truth, trust were designed, the platforms are designed to spread lies 6 times faster. That's from 2018 MIT study. We haven't done a recent one after Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it to X. It's significantly worse. On Facebook, they stopped their fact-checking. Facts don't matter, right? And of course, there are shortened attention spans. Tribalism, these are all kind of going down. And how to stand up to a dictator, which, by the way, just hit number 3 on the New York Times bestseller, like years after, right? It's bizarre, but I think kind of the way that Alexandra said, we've lived through this, this is all happening. The Friends of Friends algorithm, they found out by A/B testing that when they recommend a friend of a friend, that you're more prone to grow your network, which grows the platform. So that is actually what pulls us apart. That's the polarization. Then all of these other things, doxing, dogpiling, bullying. And what's the impact on it? As of March this year, Sweden, VDEM in Sweden, said that 72% of the world is now under authoritarian rule. There were 74 major elections in 2024. That was when I was telling Alexandra in 2022. I really feared 2024. We are electing illiberal leaders democratically, right? And the 2 fracture lines in every country we've studied are the same. It is gender and race. And online violence is real-world violence. I'll show you some of the examples. I'm going to show you this because lived experience gives you something really, it's knowledge that you can't beat. This is the network that attacked journalists and opposition politicians in the Philippines. It was so organized in 2016 that they did it by demographic. Each one of these accounts took care of the thinking class, the middle class, and the mass base. And the same message, right? But what things did they spread about me? Things like this, right? For every person in the room, if you become targeted, they look for your weakest link. Like, what will make you, because this is free speech used to pound you to silence. So for me, they tried my sex, the way I look, the way I sound. The way I look stuck because I'm not corrupt. Anyway, I've lived a lot of my life publicly. This is my 40th year as a journalist. But if you look, I have dry skin. Did you know that could be used against you? So I have dry skin, and every photo that these networks pushed out made my skin look significantly worse. But then it went to this. Don't drink anything. They started calling me scrotum face. When it moves towards dehumanization, you have to be aware, because that is the step to violence. This was around the time when I began to get closed-in security. I increased the security of Rappler, right? Scrotum face, it took the platforms a year to take this down. Right? I mean, and one of the first ones to send it to me was my mom, who was like, what is happening? It took me 3 months to figure this out, right? And even as they took that one down, they began to use code words, and you'll see this in some of the things you're living through. So SF, scrotum face, is still used to describe me today. When something big, we have an investigative report, or 1,000 Cuts was a frontline documentary, they're very creative, right? Scrotum face is still there. And Vote PH is a Facebook page, still is. Next. I'm not alone. This is 2022. Women all around the world. This is 300 women journalists. And let's go to the next slide. This was published by UNESCO with the International Center for Journalists. 73% of women journalists have experienced this online abuse. 25% have actually had threats of physical violence. I joke in the Philippines that, I eat death threats for breakfast. At a certain point, I was getting an average of 90 hate messages per day. And then, anyway, of the 25%, 20% become real-world attacks. This is for women all around the world, women journalists. I sat in 2023 on a table with the women who were covering President Trump, and none of them really complained about it or told their bosses about it because they thought it would be seen as a sign of weakness. When you're attacked like this, you have to report. You have to pull your community together. And now generative AI. I get several of these. I'm showing you one of the first ones because this one came from Russia. It's a Russian scam network. It's a deep fake that was spread first through Facebook and then Microsoft's Bing. And I want to show it to you because go ahead and click that through and let's see if the audio works. Because it was really decent. I mean, this is the first one. And you have to click volume. I've never sold crypto. I would never tell you to buy crypto. But, CEOs were calling me saying, what's the crypto, Maria? And I'm like,
I urge everyone to check this out before
now
the bank shut
it's
down
gotten
this
worse. Let's go to the next one. It's gotten worse. Now I have deep fakes that tell people, if you have diabetes, throw away your insulin, right? These are dangerous things, and it's happening. The enshittification of the internet is full steam ahead. So this is how we responded, right? Under the time of Duterte, before we begin with all the really geeky part, right? I'm here in front of you today with, in 2017, we had more than 21 investigations. And there was a point in time in 2019 where I kept getting arrest warrants, 11 arrest warrants in about 14 months. I have one case left of the 11 criminal charges. I can still go to jail for 7 years, but thanking you for the work that you've done to help us to shine the light. And we need to do the same thing again. But here's the part I want you to remember. The man who tried to jail me was arrested in March this year, and he is now he's now at The Hague awaiting trial, right? So there is no roadmap, guys. You put one foot in front of the other. There will be moments where you're afraid, but you put one foot in front of the other And what guides you are our values, right? These democratic values that unites us. Now, why am I showing you this? This is the company that allowed Rappler to survive. We splintered off our economic arm and created a company called Nerve. And we did what investigative journalists do, but then we did this for companies. This now probably provides 30 to 40% of the revenue of Rappler. All right, here's the part that's difficult, and I'm going to make a prediction that I hope I'm wrong. If you look at all the data today, small and medium-sized news organizations can die between 6 to 8 months from now. We don't have very long, right? So let me take you through what we did do and why this was important, because it does go hand in hand with investigative journalism. So the first thing that we would do, we map the information ecosystem, right? Data and landscape review. You can do big data of structured data, which is journalism, and then unstructured big data. You pull that down. Alexandra Geese, I'll pull down her name and I can get what are the conversations, what are the topics that people are talking about and how are they spreading. So you cluster them this way, topics and spread, the distribution. Then we go through data forensics. Data forensics breaks this down into those two clusters. Data psychology takes the ocean analysis and then looks at how these networks of distribution have behaved, which then leads to, if you're going to counter it, what's the narrative strategy? What's the content strategy? If you're going to do this again, think about like a Rappler when we're fighting a Duterte Marcos network. And finally, what's the distribution network for this? And that's how we, and at the tail end of this, I'll show you how we can reclaim facts. We've worked in different countries around the world now, and we started by studying the Philippines. Once we knew what was happening in the Philippines, then we began to see it pop up in so many other countries around the world. And I worry about France and Germany. But anyway, let's just take through influence operations and how it works, right? There you go. There are two parts of it. Let's just pull this down. Go ahead and click it all the way through to the end of this slide. Keep going. So there's the seeding part, which is when you push it. It doesn't have to go viral. You just have to seed it. And then opportunistic amplification means you hit it every time there's an opportunity to hit it, right? So what's an example of a narrative that's seeded? Oh, like Ukraine. Right? It was seeded in 2014. A lot of the same meta-narrative that was used by Putin 8 years later to invade Ukraine itself. Right? So it was in 2014 used to annex Crimea, and that same meta-narrative opportunistically hit became what Putin used to invade Ukraine itself. Right? So narrative building, the echo chamber reinforcement, exploit in every crisis. Then what you haven't really seen, and I wish we could map this together, is the networks, the nervous system that is running through all our countries. And that gets to the point where the lies are normalized. Here's an example. Let's click again. It's not working. Southport riot, right? This is a simple one where you saw a mass stabbing and then it was pounded. I feel really bad for governments today because it's hard to communicate, sometimes impossible, right? So if you look at this through these false claims, and despite the correction, the lies kept winning. And in the report, actually, what we saw, I won't say Elon Musk played a big role, but yes, we know that. Go ahead to the next slide. So the same thing, you can take it apart, click again, click, click, click. So you can see the timeline, and you can see anti-immigrant narratives before, during, and after the Southport riot. I can share this with you. In fact, we've published this, right? But you can see which networks. So in the old days, when I used to do counterterrorism, when that was my beat in Southeast Asia for CNN, I can look at a recidivist network and know what it can do. Well, the platforms know what are the recidivist networks that spread online violence. Next slide. Okay, so let's go to China, because I like China. It's my part of the world, right? China used to be like, before 2004, it was very much, the propaganda is very much, oh, great leader. But after 2014, then 2016, it became far more focused, and it took lessons from the Russian disinformation networks. So Chinese propaganda in the Philippines, and if you look at the spike, so over to the left, you're seeing the clusters of topics, and then over to the right, you can see the push. And the heightened push almost always coincides with a near miss, right? Like a real world in the South China Sea, what the Philippines calls the West Philippine Sea, real world, just a shot that could start a war, right? So it's very close. This should be part of the way we look at wars, because this is how it begins. Next slide. So this is Chinese propaganda in the Philippines. Now I want to show you how something spreads and how it takes over and how it becomes facts. This one is something that we tracked from 2011 all the way to 2022. And it's just this lie that the reason that the Marcoses, Imelda Marcos, you remember her shoes, her husband Ferdinand Marcos, was ousted in a people power revolt. And yet in 2022, we elected Ferdinand Marcos Jr. overwhelmingly as our president. He's not done as badly as we expected. We moved from hell to purgatory. So it's, yeah, I have to call a spade, but this is how the history changed in the Philippines, because the Marcoses weren't corrupt. They didn't steal $10 billion in 1986 dollars. What they did was they found gold. They found gold. And Imelda Marcos said this on national television. They found gold and kept it in their basement. But I want you to look at the orange. Those are news organizations and fact-checking groups. The green is the disinformation, right? So you can see each year how it has shifted. This is the beginning, and all the way at the bottom left is 2022. So you can see in 2016, when Marcos ran for vice president, that the disinformation, the green grew. You can see in 2020 with the virus, with the pandemic, it exploded. And you can see when the news organizations began fighting back in 2021. That was when we began to organize ourselves, and I'll show you what we did. And 2022, regardless, President Marcos won. So, next slide. This is the way it works. Finally, I'm going to just end with this last example from the U.S. information ecosystem. We pulled down 3 years of data, and the 3 years of data focused on several things. Let's go to the next slide. The 3 top topics that Americans had focused on by February 2024 were these: immigration, abortion, and Gaza, right? And in each one of these, what's fascinating in just this one slide is that Americans voted based on where they get their, and I'm going to do rabbit ears, news, right? And the generation gap has never been as large as it is today. That's part of the reason you're seeing, not just like in our days, there was a generation gap, but when people vote according to the news they get, you can see that 55 and up, we still are largely mainstream media, but 18 to 34, largely social media. And next slide, they believe it, right? Largely, if you look at it, it's now 60% of Americans get their news from social media. They trust political information they see on social media. And part of it is that they may not even really think about it. It just gets into the ecosystem, into their biology. So 18 to 34, look at that. 55% believe, they trust it. But look at 55 and above, 51% of us distrust it. That's the generation gap. Next slide. All right, have I already, this is the last depressing one. Let's just wrap up all of the harms, right? And I come from a global south country, so some of this stuff is very real for us. Surveillance, capitalism, digital colonialism, right? If you are a woman, LGBTQ+, if you are an ethnic minority, if you live in the global south, the code further marginalizes you, right? There are biased and oppressive AI systems. We in the global south clean it up for you in the global north. The exploitation of data workers, that connects to that. And here's something we don't talk about often enough: environmental damage from resource-intensive AI operations. If you didn't see Kate Crawford's piece in the New York Times, they did a video on it, but this was what was alarming for me. One of the major companies said that they need 250 nuclear reactors to power the demand of a system, and I think you heard this yesterday, that isn't actually going to return the investments that are there, right? And finally, that last one, which is what I've spent a lot of time on, destruction of agency and democracy. Next slide. Now I go to the end. No, these are the things that Dimitri and I think in 2022, these are the things that we tried to do to reclaim our rights. On a macro picture, the 10-point action plan. And we targeted Europe here because America was lost in space. Anyway, hashtag reclaim our rights. The first, stop surveillance for profit. Who said that you could commodify me as a human being? Who said you could get my data, right? And two, stop coded bias. And finally, that last one, what will happen when you lose journalists? Right now, the impunity of crawling every news site of all these new AI companies, there's so many of them crawling Rappler that we're literally paying for server space for them to steal our content. You get that? Right? Literally, every news group is being crawled because they want facts. And yet, they're doing it illegally against copyright laws. And at the same time, we're being forced to pay for them stealing for us. It's like I asked someone outside to come steal from my house, and I'll pay you to do it. This is what's happening. Journalism as an antidote to tyranny. Next slide. All right, I'm coming to how much more time do I have? You're not here. Yay! Okay. 3 solutions. And actually, hopefully, this will help you in what you're doing. Because obviously, in the last decade, I felt like Sisyphus and Cassandra combined. And I couldn't just keep talking about it without doing something about it, right? So this is what we've done. In 2011, when I first started Rappler, my elevator pitch was very simple. We build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. You can replace journalism with facts, right? And the 3 pillars are the same: journalism, community, technology. You build the journalism to feed your community, and how do they get to your community? Through technology. What are the 3 things we're doing here? Next slide. So this first one is on the journalism end, especially in the global south, because we don't have the philanthropy that the global north has. So in 2019, we began talking about the International Fund for Public Interest Media. And let me show you some of the stats. In 2022, we launched it. We raised about $60 million. This is essentially a way for governments to help investigative journalism survive in these countries, 26 countries, 20 government, foundation, and private sector donors. Next slide. Look at what we found in that first year and a half. 93% reported positive major impact, 63% increased their total revenue, 53% increased their earned revenue, 88% increased the audience reach of their content because we shared, right? Next slide. Keep going. Yeah, sorry, I like that thing. Oh. All right, he moved us ahead. I can share that with you. But you can also go to IFPIM, International Fund for Public Interest Media. This is the second part about communities. Guys, communities don't just form, right? I mean, Jane Fonda is now resuscitating what her father created against McCarthyism. It is in the physical world, it is in the virtual world. And this is what we did in the Philippines. This is the pushback that you saw in 2021. We did 16 news organizations doing fact checks. And they were connected. We all decided to do a data privacy agreement where we put it on a data platform, and all that data went all the way up to the research groups in academia. Look at it. This is civil society. News groups pushing out fact checks, which don't spread as fast as the lies, right? So every day, the mesh layer, 116 different groups, every single member, they go anywhere from 100 to over 1,000. Every single member, my NERV team, would give them 5 choices of fact checks. And you, as a member of any of our partners, would share your fact check with emotion. Because we live in a world where your cell phone is pushing hyper emotion, right? So you share it with emotion, but here's the other part. You don't become a monster to fight a monster. You cannot use anger. And what we found, every week we mapped our landscape, and we found that inspiration spreads as fast as anger. I still believe in the goodness of humanity, right? I think we're basically good. And then the research groups, the academe, 8 of them, every week they took the data and they released it to the public. It was the universities that showed who, what's the meta-narrative that's being seeded, who's being targeted. And then that last layer, rule of law. How do you have rule of law without facts? You don't. That's really the question today, right? So, next slide. When we mapped it, we began to see in the Philippines that there were 4 major groups, clusters. In a country like the United States, our clusters are far more complicated, but I'll show you that another day. But you can see here, when I saw, so news people who follow news cluster together, artists cluster together, activists cluster together. We probably all cluster together in this room, but you need to move outside to find boundary spanners. The faith group, when I saw this map, and it was around the year that Pope Francis called about a dozen Nobel laureates together, I began working very closely with faith, right? Because faith actually is visceral as well. Next slide. This was the strategy. You move the Facebook pages over to that quadrant where you have, because using engagement when you don't really quantify it and you use what the platforms do always means you're in a corrupted public information ecosystem, right? So you'll see my last one is actually a response to that. Let me switch to the last slide. The moment that we took over the center of our public information ecosystem is this. The blue are our partners, the orange are the boundary spanners, and the yellow, that's the spread, right? Those are the facts. I'm going to end with the technology. Next slide. I keep hoping that a government will actually build a public interest tech stack, but no one has. And so if you really think about it, tech companies abdicated their responsibility for protecting the public sphere, but so did democratic governments. This mediation, the virtual world, should not be in the hands of private companies. So we began to look at the Matrix Protocol about 3 years ago. The Matrix Protocol is used by France and Germany, right? They care about data privacy. But let me show you. Let's keep going. This is 150 million addressable users. It's decentralized, it's open source, it's end-to-end encrypted. And these are the groups that are using this, right? You have governments, you have military, you have intelligence. Why not normal people? And so what we did in December 2023, we built on top of that open source and built a tech stack for news organizations. And today we literally, let me show you what that looks like. Next slide. This is the matrix. Now EU is the first to begin to talk about digital sovereignty. I only have a few left. So this is the end part, right? Because we will not save democracy if we do not have a public interest tech stack, right? And it isn't, so, no, sorry, stay there. Stay there. So let me say what that is. What is the Matrix chat app, right? Rappler began one session on the Matrix, and now we have the Philippine Press Institute, which has more than 60 different news organizations, 3 other independent news sites also on the Matrix protocol. It means that I can now build community online without my community being insidiously manipulated. And we rolled this out. We used this during our midterm elections last May, and it was incredible. We opened it to government officials in the Philippines. Yes, I am working with government officials in the Philippines, right? But here's the best part about the matrix, because it isn't just digital sovereignty for us. You can still connect to anything else on the internet. You're just not controlled by it, right? So, and I'm going to end with this slide. Please try it. iOS, Android, we've rolled it out, and now it's shifting one more time, right? So again, those three things: journalism, community. How do you build community? It's ×4 in the virtual world. You need a tech stack. And this is it. Let me end with this. Last 2 minutes of a basketball game. Last 2 minutes of a doomsday clock. This is it. Right? Part of the reason I was telling Alexandra and Courtney, I am hitting a city a week because I want to make sure you move. Stop thinking, stop debating, start moving, and you're not going to get a roadmap. You're going to have to stick to your values, and it's going to be scary. And you take one foot in front of the other, and you just keep going. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Every time I hear you speak, I am inspired and I learn, and I have to say, I think you're the first person who has, in the journalism community, who I think, understands how all of these factors play together in terms of the manipulation, the platform dominance, the generative AI economics, and the situation that we're in now with democracy. And, I have to say, I don't think that the title of your book was supposed to be an instruction manual. But it seems, when you talk about the public interest tech stack, I want to talk there because, you're in a country, right? I mean, you're in the EU Parliament, and as you said, there are governments that have some of this going. Yeah. And we hear a lot about responsible AI, ethical journalism. Let's just get right to it. Can you be doing ethical journalism if you're doing it on the platforms that are extracting your audience data, your revenue, replacing you, stealing your content?
You're wading in polluted waters. So even as you're getting, and people say this all the time, right? Even as you're getting some distribution, you're also being poisoned at the same time, right? The reason why I say news organizations have about a year is because there are only 3 ways a news website gets traffic, right? It's direct, social, or search. In 2023, so direct is all you have, because in 2023, social began to cut traffic to news sites. So as the majority of the world, as 74 elections happened in 2024, these platforms completely choked traffic to facts. And then the third one is search, right? Because when we were attacked, we're a Facebook country. For 6 years in a row, Filipinos spent the most time online and on social media globally. It ended in 2021. That was when I got the Nobel. I wonder if that had any... No, but what happened was that we switched to search. 60+% of our traffic came from search. And then in 2023, Google began to do an experiment called Search Generative Experience in 125 countries. And then in 2024, they rolled it out. So now if you search, you're going to get an answer to your question, but you're not going to get a link to a news website. So what's the drop in traffic for every one of us? On search, 50% to 75%. On social, 50% to 85%. And those are in your countries, right? So it depends. So I guess do it at your own peril. We're still in all these platforms. We're a partner of every single major company. Hi, partners, but you go in with your eyes wide open. That's why we built the Matrix Protocol chat app, because we troll, because that's where our people are. But I don't want to stay there because I'll get poisoned there.
Right. And so the studies, I think the Tollbitch study showed 98% drop in referral traffic to publishers specifically, right?
Yep.
And, meanwhile, you have more and more publishers putting their content behind paywalls. We know that, Anthropic, I think it's 73,000 scrapes per referral, right? I mean, it's just, these are massive. And when Google started, it was 2 to 1. Now it's 7 to 1, getting worse. So I hear from a lot of publishers, though, it's like, but, we don't want to not be in the chat bots because A, at least it's like a little tiny bit of referral traffic, and B, they're worried about their public interest role. They don't want the chatbots to be dominated by the enshittified internet and Russian and Chinese propaganda. What should publishers do in this case?
Thank you for asking. If you go on that chat app, you will see that we also built a data lake with an ontology, and we used GraphRag. So our LLM, the large language model, is anchored in facts. It takes a little bit longer and it costs a little bit more. But here's the thing. Our error rate for that LLM is less than 2%. Less than 2% versus, because remember, LLMs are probabilistic machines. They're machines. It depends on what you feed them. And when you use these things, again, at best, OpenAI and Google are at 16%. And at worst, it can go up to 79% error rate. So for news organizations, I think we should be building our own, right? That's in the Matrix chat app. And frankly, we've prevented, and Tollbit is relatively new, but we've prevented scraping of Rappler. But guess what? Guess what you can't prevent? You can't prevent Google's search. Right. Because if you prevent the bot, Gemini, from coming in, you disappear from search. Right? So we use them all.
So two things I want to pick up on that.
It's like the Inferno, Dante's Inferno. You just keep going up.
Seventh layer of hell.
Yeah.
So thank you, first of all, everyone in this room. I hope we can leave here with a commitment not to use the industry jargon hallucination, right? We are talking about predictive algorithms that make errors. So you just heard Maria use the term error. She is not giving in to the industry jargon of hallucination.
It's an error rate, guys. And if this was any other industry, it would not be allowed public release. Exactly.
So given that we have this, when we can talk about error rates, and you mentioned the fact that, they're self-preferencing, right? Google has search engine.
I love you, Google, but not this time.
Europe has the Digital Markets Act,
yes.
right? It seems to me that there are existing provisions in existing law that could be used to, break up the monopoly's ability to steal your content and, direct people to it. And more broadly, the surveillance advertising ecosystem.
Yeah.
Do we need new tools or should we be using the ones we have?
I think it's both. The same way that I showed you, right? There isn't a single silver bullet. So we need to head to all, right? What we're trying to do is to find a sustainable business model for a news organization and then to replicate it, right? News people, you are all on the same side. If you haven't actually gotten that yet, then, this is why I keep pushing for radical collaboration. Look, part of what's exciting at this moment in time is that it is creation. And one of the things we've learned, especially in the United States, is that the law is only as good as the people who implement it, right? So, yes, there are some clauses. I would have actually preferred that the EU do much more with the design instead of the engagement rate. But, yay, it's the best we have. But the other part is this. I also know that at the time you were debating this, the kind of, what do they call it when they lobby? The lobbying was 125 million euros every year. And in America, at that same time period, big tech was at $70 million a year. Right, guys, this is power and money. And now it is coming together in a way that we have to do what, I'm sorry, I'm really on Jane Fonda right now because she just, if you look at what she said, the only effective way we've found is to come together, to collaborate. And she's learned this in lots of hard ways. But what we learned in the Philippines, let me give you a lesson for me. When at the worst attacks in the virtual world, when in the first 4 months after the Duterte administration tried to shut us down, they called our advertisers, and we dropped 49% of our advertising revenue in 4 months. Rappler should have shut down in 2018. But what did we do? We went into the physical world, where people were still afraid, but they stood behind us. It's okay if you stand behind us. It's all right. And they funded us. The crowdfunding, my team laughs all the time, but that year, 2019, it was interesting because every time I got an arrest warrant, we would get a spike of crowdfunding and my sales team would be really happy. Except I kept telling them this is not a sustainable business model. So, look, I think that we go back into the physical world to fix the virtual world and to demand better. And this is where we begin.
And it does seem like Europe has a better range of existing laws because we know how hard it is to pass new laws. We have, they have the GDPR, the data protection, they have digital markets, they have digital services, but it feels like they're only using like a little bit of it. And the rest of us and the rest of the world, from the Philippines to the United States, where we're seeing rising authoritarianism. I never thought I'd have to use the stuff we did together in my own country. It seems like we really need Europe to stand up and do more. So you're in the European Parliament. If you had to say 3 things on your bucket list, your wish list, for the European Parliament to do in terms of fixing some of the problems you said, but also maybe just 2 seconds before I get to that is you said find a business model. Yeah. But how do you find a business model if that needle in a haystack that you're looking for is the haystack is so imbalanced and, it's a market. You can't find a business model when the market is so captured and dominated and unfair. Right? So thinking about those 2 things, what would you have the European Parliament do?
So I'm going to end with the European Parliament last, but I'm going to remind you, especially those from the global south. I saw someone from Brazil, right? Brazil is leading the charge in terms of both information integrity and standing up for rule of law. And Brazil, Chile, Uruguay, Spain came together and pulled about 20 nations together. This is called Democracia Siempre, but I'm hoping Southeast Asia joins as well. They have 3 things that they're pushing. Information integrity. And this happened at the UN 3 weeks ago. Was it only 3 weeks ago? So democracia siempre, information integrity. The second, sustainable development, right? And the third, more important, democracy, democratic institutions. But I still believe we have to do this in a multilateral landscape. So those in the global south, stop talking about colonialism and start leading. What does leadership in the global south look like? What if the global north isn't quite doing its job? Hey, EU, I'm coming to you. What can we do now? Because this is it. So that was interesting. The people who are activists on AI red lines, we both signed on to this. At the UN, there's no opposition to it. Even China signed on, right? So this looks like it's moving forward. To the EU, you've done it already, right? And the world is going to get a little scarier. You don't have 100 years in jail. Hold the line and implement, because the minute you do that, you will find it will be so much easier to communicate to your own people, to actually build a better world, right? So this is, those are the 3 things, right? Journalism, technology, and community. How do we do this with information integrity? That's been the goal. I have 24 hours in a day, and that's what I'm working on.
I love that so much. And before I open up to questions, so get your hands ready, I'm going to take 3 questions at once to give to you. So community, part of that, so yes, we need the public policy that enables the business models that we create and find to succeed. And we need community. And you talked about the idea of journalism community coming together to create their own technology. So the Global Forum for Media Development and OCCRP, the Organized Crime and Corruption Project, and Global Investigative Journalism Network, et cetera, along with Center for Journalism and Liberty, we created the Journalism Cloud Alliance to try to create cloud level, part of the infrastructure for investigative journalism, but for journalism more broadly. And you talked about, all the bot traffic that imposes costs.
Yep.
We're beholden to the cloud providers and whatever they're charging for services and data access. So what other parts of the tech stack do you think the journalism community should come together? And how can we think about this community nationally, but also globally?
Yeah, so actually, if you, in November 2024, Maria Ressa wrote a book called The Tech Coup, right? It puts every part of technology together, from the chips to everything else, right? And it's directly connected to politics and power. And that's part of the reason you saw a lot of the CEOs on the first row in the inauguration of President Trump, right? Unlike news organizations, which are held to stringent laws, frankly, treat them like publishers. But unlike that, they don't have a set of standards and ethics. It is the business first. It is surveillance for profit. So we need to demand better. Let me say, so I recommend Maria Ressa's book. There are only 4 ways that there are 4 ways the world is looking at this, right? The first is America's way, which is extremely laissez-faire, and it has, in How to Stand Up to a Dictator, I compared Duterte to Mark Zuckerberg. Guys, who's the bigger dictator, right? And I say it in the book, right? And that book is full of data, right? So a lot more than, so I'm very geeky in this part. So the first is that in terms of how we communicate with each other, I think the second one is all of the chips and all of the, like Marichka talks about how in the Netherlands, your natural resources. How are you giving that away, right? Because you will make more money out of it. But if you only go after the short-term profit, you give up medium and long-term survivability. There's a lot more. But look, I have a 24-hour day, and I've focused on just trying to give us a corruption-free public information ecosystem. I can tell you what we're doing works in the Philippines right now. Like I said, like Brazil, like us, moved from hell to purgatory. But they have elections next year. That's also why information integrity is incredibly important. Guys, the last part, we didn't talk about this, but think about this. From 2016, which is when the political dominoes began to fall, until 2024, all those elections were tainted, right? And yet it took little Romania to actually void an election. Anyone here from Romania? See? It took little Romania to do it. And why? Because the front runner only campaigned on TikTok, and he didn't have a political party. Right? So they had to redo it, and it was a great pain. And again, they face the same problems domestically. How do you do it? How do you tell your people what? Anyway, so I'm just saying, we're eating and drinking poison, and we will not win the battle for democracy until we clean it up.
Absolutely. And if I may, Maria is great, and she was at the conference yesterday. And a little plug, if you haven't read the whole book, I did a guest host of the Tech Tank podcast for Brookings that I interviewed her for because of this conference. So that'll be up soon. Okay, I want to go to a couple of questions. Please, short and sweet. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It was a really inspiring talk. I am a researcher, and I currently work on democracy and media support in the next EU budget. And one of the big questions is, you mentioned that business models are really unsustainable. So how can also, the EU support media? Like for now, it's between, I looked at the numbers, between 20 or 50 million a year. But the question is, of course, also state capture. You don't want to have too much public funding. And what you think of the idea of public interest information as a European public good, because for now it's kind of seen as, nice to have. And my second question linked to that is whether platforms should be seen as publishers, and if that's a good thing or not, knowing that, with algorithms and recommender systems, they do have editorial kind of choices. Thank you.
Great. I want to take 2 more. Over here, Romanian.
Thank you very much. I'm German from Romania. I have studied physics and informatics. I'm a member of the European Physical Society. I'm coming more for the technological part, more scientific part, and I have two questions concerning the information integrity. Artificial intelligence is a lot used to produce fake news. The problem is that we have methods to recognize if a scene or a speech is made with artificial intelligence. My question is not better to teach the people, the young people, there are all the young people who are using the social platforms, to teach the young people in school how to make the difference between a fake news and the normal news and a real one. This is my first question.
Okay, we're going to take one question each just so we have time. I'm so sorry. I want to make sure that we have a couple more times for questions. So let me go to this side of the room. Barry, did you have a question? No. Okay, sorry. Okay, in the back.
Thank you. The credible threat of violence is silencing many of our colleagues, including perhaps some people in this room. Can you give us some ideas on how to navigate those threats, please?
Okay, great. So let's start with that. We've got EU support to media, fake news and AI, publishers as platforms, and the threat of violence.
So much, but thank you for all the questions. The way I think about this, who asked the first question? So the way I think about this, and because I became a journalist because information is power, right? And I think we forget that part. So I think about like this river, which is the public information ecosystem, and I try to figure out downstream versus upstream, right? The downstream one would be like, yes, we can keep doing content moderation for 4 or 5 years was the main thing. We still need to do content moderation, but we now have something called ROOST, Robust Open Online Safety Tools, that is free for everyone, guys. We raised $31 million for this, and we incubated it at the Institute of Global Politics. So if you need content moderation tools, we have a new one that's out called Osprey. But anyway, so what I saw were, people would, and this is the easy one, they'll say, let's take river water and drop a pill. It's drinkable. But then we throw it right back into the polluted river, right? So an upstream solution would be to stop the factory of lies that is polluting the river, so that this way we can drink the river, we can begin to clean it up, and it will stay clean, right? So it's a really tough thing. So for me, this becomes the most important thing we need to do, because the more we let it go, the more we fall into this. Actually, fascism is the right word, because Madeleine Albright pushed me on this, right? Because essentially, it's death by 1,000 cuts of democracy. If people don't have facts and a shared reality, you can't mobilize. Those are all the same thing. You lose your rights by not even knowing you've lost your rights. The second one, I think connected to this, you asked about platforms as publishers. Absolutely, right? Like, why are they exempt? Well, part of it is because it was a 1996 Communications Decency Act, where there's a Section 230 where we looked at them like they were pipes. But they're not pipes. They choose. And they don't choose every story. They choose for tens of millions of stories, right? That's the second. In terms of, from the woman from Romania, the enshittification is full steam ahead. That's a Cory Doctorow word. He has a new book out as well. But it is now so easy to make fiction fact and fact fiction. And it plays to our cognitive biases. This is it's kind of like if you allow lead in paint for our kids. This is what is poisoning our information ecosystem. While Finland did well with teaching the younger kids, they did that since World War II. We live in a thinking fast world where our biology has been hacked. There is no thinking slow system that is going to plug the hole right now, right? So what we need to do is come together and call a spade a spade. By the way, that is the other thing that tech has enabled, the flattening of meaning. Words don't have meaning anymore. And as a journalist, you look for the absolute right one. A lie is a lie is a lie. Okay, and the last one, the threat of violence. I worry about this all the time because I've seen it in so many countries. Anyone here from Georgia? I also love how Georgia has had more than 310 days. Hello, Georgia! 310 days of Nzia Amaglobeli, a journalist in Georgia, has been sentenced. We share the same lawyer, but my book has been translated into Georgian. She held it up because she couldn't speak. She was behind a glass wall. How to stand up to a dictator in Georgian. It's really interesting. Anyway, I'm going to leave you with this one. Yuri Andropov, the former KGB chair, former head of the Soviet Union, he said, "Disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become an addict, a changed person." We are all addicts right now because of, I don't have my cell phone. It's very rare I don't have a cell phone. Because of because we carry this with us, because it is intimate for us, right? I worry about the new studies that show how generative AI, these bots, are replacing intimate relationships and pushing young folks into a spiral that leads to violence, right? So this is a tipping point. This is an inflection point. I don't know what other word to use. You're empowered in the room. And I think, we need to reclaim our rights.
100% agree with reclaiming our rights. And whereas I agree with literally almost everything you said, I want to just correct slightly is that the Communications Decency Act actually didn't treat the platforms like pipes, and that's the problem, right? We gave them this special rights, exemption from liability, exemption from defamation, and we didn't say, but you can't discriminate, you can't manipulate, you can't listen in on everyone's calls, you can't collect all the data, right? So I think if only we had regulated them as pipes.
But I don't think, so to go back, right, I now work in the institute that Hillary Clinton heads, and we debate this all the time because some of these rules, at least in America, were during the Bill Clinton administration. The internet was a different thing at that point in time. I loved social media. I created Rappler on social media. If the search was better on Facebook, I would have created Rappler on Facebook. Thank God it wasn't good, right? And we built the website. Just saying now, it's the same way that I said, get out, step on the world, and look at it the way it is. Because it is destroyed. It is the rubble of what it was. And that's the only way we can begin to create. Doesn't matter how we got here. We got here. What are we going to do now?
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Maria, for helping us think about what we're going to do now. Thank you so much. I'm going to invite up our panelists so that we can get a little bit more into the question around media freedom, right? This is the intersection of AI, big tech, and the future of media freedom, because we can't have a response to the information integrity issue. We can address the problem, but we also have to address the solution, as you said. Thank you so much, Maria. Journalism is an antidote. Journalism is the supply side. And so we have to figure out how do we address these issues and come up with some solutions. So please, panelists, come on up. We've got MEP Gisa up with us. We've got Mira Milosevic, the Executive Director of the Global Forum for Media Development, Quinn McHugh, the Executive Director of Article 19, and Dimi Zagorski, the Europe Policy Director for Wikimedia, which is, we wanted to get a range of perspectives. Sorry, here it comes. Thinking about our information environment. And, we've just heard Maria Ressa warn that the battle for facts is the battle for freedom. So we need to ask ourselves what happens when the infrastructures of truth themselves, of fact-based observation and analysis, our media systems, our open knowledge commons, our online speech spaces, are captured and distorted by big tech and now by the AI systems. So thank you to the panelists for joining us. I know it's a really hard thing to follow Maria Ressa. But, why don't we start in, and Alexandra, you've just heard a lot of the diagnosis of the problem, and you also know that, media freedom is under attack around the world, in Europe, by the platforms, et cetera. What do you think that Europe can do? You heard a question also about the budget process, about funding for media, but thinking broadly, what can we do?
Well, that's a great question, if only I knew. But I think Maria gave us a lot of inspiration, and I know that one thing is already happening, that there's people, I don't know if any of them is in the room, that are working on building European platforms, on building the technology, and this is what you did, and I think this is why are we not doing this in Europe? And we started a year ago with the idea of the Eurostack to think about digital infrastructure, because it's important to have a social media platform, but then you need the cloud capacities. So this is something that we started in Europe and where we have industry on board working on this, but this is also a big fight because, the lobbying you mentioned, I think this is something we really need to make sure we're not underestimating. If I may, just an anecdote to illustrate that. Yesterday after the conference, I was invited to the technology roundtable of the Munich Security Conference, and that was the new Minister for Digital Affairs from Germany in the room. And right next to him was the public affairs person of Palantir, who did most of the talking. And there were, representatives of all the big tech companies in the room. There was not a single European company in the room. There was not a single journalist in the room. There was not a single NGO in the room. It was a few lawmakers, a few policymakers, the minister, and the American big tech companies. Strongly advocating against any regulation, against making sure that European companies can build digital infrastructure, because this is what we need to build a European social platform, because we do that. And then Google or AWS can just say, President Trump told me to just cut you off. This is something that can happen. So I think that is the first thing, have a European or more a platform where many startups, many initiatives, journalism can build their own platforms, their own apps, their own technology. That is super important. I think the other pillar is we do have the regulation. This is the advantage we have in Europe. So let's keep pushing to really implement it. And Maria said that. I'm really frustrated because we're right there. We can do this tomorrow, and the European Commission is not doing this because they lack the courage, because they're afraid of the Trump administration. They're afraid of higher tariffs. They're trading in democracy just to sell a few more cars to the US. That is something that we need to stand up against, and everybody has to say, we're waiting for Europe. Have this courage. So I think we need to do the two things at the same time. What can we do at the level of the European Union? The European Commission is coming forward with the so-called Democracy Shield. They will have some funding for fact-checking, for protecting politicians during electoral campaigns against violence, and some more initiatives. Those are good things, but it's all it's not really attacking the real problem. So what I would want them to do, to have some funding to start European platforms, for example, looking at the infrastructure, common moderation tools, and something that everybody can use. And that is something that I think we should be fighting for.
So, Quinn, you work with journalists and human rights defenders around the world to protect freedom of expression. And I think that when Maria, when in her Nobel Peace Prize speech, seemed to speak for a lot of the profession that said, these American companies controlling our global information ecosystem are biased against facts and biased against journalism. We also heard how much worse authoritarianism is getting. There's less democracy. Mm-hmm. Democracy Shield's are we gonna fact check our way out of this? I mean, how are we going to defend media freedom when it seems like all of the trends are moving downwards? How are you guys approaching this?
So, one thing I think we need to start with is, no, we're not going to fact check our way out of this. That's not to say that facts are not what we should build the world on. But if you look at the fact-checking initiatives around the world, the amount of money going for that is going down. There's not a lot of new infrastructure being put in place for that. But I want to take a step back, and in the context of your question, and in the context of a lot of this discussion that we've been having, I want to challenge us all to avoid the idea of inevitability. If you go and you listen to the tech companies right now, and who are the major investors in artificial intelligence, they will tell you that AI is inevitable. Inevitable. Throwing up regulation, trying to stop it, you can't unwind history. That is, show me one major technological advance in human history that we have not subsequently improved on or made safer. There is none. So the idea that we should just have unfettered access for artificial intelligence systems to be designed is a marketing idea, to kind of take that point. We're being fed marketing ideas and we're accepting it as truth. And we need to be a little bit more savvy in terms of that. The other thing that's being portrayed as inevitability, which gets to your point about media, is we increasingly say, even amongst those of us who are trying to protect media freedom, that media is on life support, right? And there's some truth in that it's getting so much harder. Sustainability is harder. The attacks are stronger. The people coming after us are stronger. I think someone yesterday gave a statistic that in the Moldovan elections, Russia spent over $200 million on media information operations to try and influence the Moldovan elections. The human rights funding call that Norway just put out is $44 million over 4 years, and media is one part of 7 of that. That's the kind of resources that we're up against, right? But challenge the idea that media is dying and the death of it is inevitable. Because as Maria has shown, people value actually having the right information. We might have to completely re-envision how we do it, but let's not feed into the narrative that we're all dying.
I love that. I think it's so important what the narrative is. And yet, one of the reasons that there is that narrative is because there have been massive cuts in development funding. USAID has been eviscerated. Lots of foreign capitals have cut their funding and support to media. And they're kind of weakening these global defenses just as authoritarian and corporate powers are tightening control. And yet we also know the problem that comes from dependence on government. So we need, business models. We need economic conditions that allow sustainable media. And Mira, you work with media organizations or development media support organizations around the world. And, there's some really interesting things happen. But I know a lot of GFMD members and the media they work with are dependent on Facebook, TikTok, maybe not as much X, YouTube. Can we have a future media freedom with these platforms? How are your media dealing with this?
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for having me here. I'm very inspired after what I've heard from Maria, Alexandra, and you and Quinn so far today, and also by the things we heard yesterday in the conference. And Maria has explained it really well, where we are with the platforms. So the search referrals are down almost 80%. The referrals from the AI chatbots and models are not even close to that. There is no business model there. And the only thing that is left is your websites, your newsletters, and your own property and media. And, some, of course, media have to operate through Facebook in some countries where they have audiences still going there, but that's not stopping them from developing platforms as a promotional tool and giving some kind of way for the media to bring audiences to their own properties. But what I wanted to say is, even when they have their own properties and their own websites, we are now facing capture there as well. And you mentioned the Journalism Cloud Alliance that we have started with our colleagues from Investigative Journalism Networks, including OCCRP, ICAJ, and others. So I will just give you an example of Panama Papers. So this is one of the most influential investigations over the last 10 years that has gathered work of 100 newsrooms and has processed around 3 terabytes of data to be able to start the investigation. That costs, and that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars just to unpack and see what's there and what data means and what can be concluded from that. It took a year for them to do this investigation. And at the end of it, they have uncovered hidden wealth with tax evasion and avoidance. Up to $2 billion has been recovered over the last 9 years since the publication has been published. So if we're talking about the value of journalism and why Europe needs to invest, some of the countries like Sweden, France, UK, not anymore EU, Spain, have recovered hundreds of millions of dollars from stolen or evaded assets. So that's one example. But for those organizations to do this work, they're all paying millions in infrastructure services and software services. And 80% majority of that is to big tech. And so we have now this trend that Maria has explained, that you produce the content, you get support, you find donations, you find your audiences that support you, but then you don't have access to the networks, you don't have access to social media. You put it on your website, you bring the audiences, but then the bots come as well and now steal your content for free, and you do have to pay egress fees of transferring that data from your website. So there is absolutely no model at the moment, especially for accountability, investigative journalism, that requires a lot of work, a lot of collaboration across borders, and a lot of resources. Without support, this is not going to happen. So what we are doing is we think that the community needs to come together and take little by little economic power and ownership. And I can talk about it a bit later when I give you my ideas about what EU can do.
Thank you for that. I think it's also interesting, when you talk about like the value and how we can, respond, right? The value that is created by journalism, obviously to democracy, but also to the AI systems themselves, right? We know that journalism is actually a small but significant portion of that. And Wikipedia is actually one of the most important data sources for AI models, yet it is under political attack. It's financially neglected. It is now also being weaponized, I think, by generative AI and bots who know that this is now a source of information. And so how are you guys dealing with this, and how Wikipedia is our kind of public encyclopedia, or public, it's not journalism per se, but I see it very much in the same world. How are you guys thinking about and addressing the attacks on knowledge and the underlying importance of Wikipedia in our new information ecosystem?
Yes, these were very many questions, but I'll start with the first one. So first of all, yes, Wikipedia is not journalism, and it is very important to keep in mind that Wikipedia cannot exist on its own. So Wikipedia can only exist if there are journalists, if there is open science, if there are really media that we can cite and refer to. So Wikipedia is actually a credible source. So for us, the shrinking of the media space is a huge problem. And the shrinking is both, there is a community, there is a content issue, there is an infrastructure issue, and there is a money issue. So these are the 4 categories we work with. Maybe just to give an example, because I think this is an experiment that maybe not many people know about, it is very uncomfortable for us to do this, but we felt the need that we need to. We're proud of being a not-for-profit, but we created a owned and operated entity called Wikimedia Enterprise, which essentially tries to, get something back from these very large companies and AI companies. Because the one thing we realized that they really need and they really value and that they're very afraid of losing access to is human knowledge and also constantly updated human knowledge. So this is the one thing where we have a leverage point. If you look at our servers over the past year, the bandwidth usage of our servers increased 50%, but our access numbers went down. So there are fewer people going to Wikipedia and its sister projects, but we have 50% more bandwidth cost. And this comes from crawlers. So what we did is we created this Wikimedia Enterprise. It essentially offers a very high-speed API, so a pipe to the Wikipedia server, because our issue is we cannot paywall our services because we are free and open and we want to remain this. Like, we don't want to change just because, some people are doing, things that we disagree with. So how does it work so far? These companies essentially come, they pay money to the Wikimedia Foundation, and then they get a high-speed live API access. For now, it started working. We're getting 4% of the annual income of the Wikimedia Foundation of this financial year comes from this. We built a cap, so we would never have more than 25% of our income come from there because we don't want to be dependent on that. But what we also didn't want to happen is that our small donors that we live on now actually fund and finance the crawlers of the AI companies. Maybe one more thing I have to say there, really, when you negotiate with these people, it's not always easy. It seems like, I don't know how open I can speak, but it seems like a lot of them are quite young and they believe they own the world. And I believe this will change. I mean, they'll go to some drama, they'll get unemployed once, and maybe in 10 years these will be nice people. But for now, it's not always easy. It's not always easy to talk to all these people. So at some point, we would hate to limit access to Wikipedia, but also we as a community might have, if this good citizen advice, please use our APIs doesn't work, we might also have to think of maybe restricting crawler access, at least to the very highest, intensity bidders, crawlers. And then, these are complicated conversations that we're having, and they're not easy for us to have because we really want to be free and open and accessible to everyone. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. It does make me wonder, maybe if you get more money, you could give some of that to the journalists and media outlets that are so important to creating, but we can have that conversation later. But this point about the value and importance of human-created data that is timely, relevant, ideally factual, is really critical because I don't know, Alexandra, if you've seen the studies that have shown just how prevalent Russian and Chinese disinformation and propaganda is in a lot of these chatbots. There have been several studies by academics, by NewsGuard, by Graphica, lots of studies showing how because they scrape the open web, you have more publishers putting their stuff offline, and you have the uptick of generative AI propaganda. This is distorting the underlying models. Europe is very concerned about, if you want to call it disinformation or propaganda, weaponized information operations. And yet there's this, tension over should we enforce our copyright law or not, right? There's a text and data mining exception for non-commercial uses, but these are not non-commercial uses. Can't we tie these together and get some action to stop the theft, to stop, to make these products safer and better?
Yes, absolutely. And one of my frustrations is that I'm not seeing all that courage and political will to do that. And especially one of the NewsGuard discovery, I keep quoting that. I've been quoting that for months since it came out. I thought it was really shocking, and the numbers are so clear, and the uptake is so clear of that information. And so I keep saying that publicly, and people look at me like, it's just a minor incident. And I quoted, so that's one of them. The other one is the direct manipulation of these systems as well. Elon Musk boasts on X every time he manipulates Grok, and then he writes it there. This is really the example that is so obvious. And I quoted that yesterday in that meeting that I told you about before the Munich Security Conference. I quoted that to the minister. And I said, well, what do we do? Because he kept going on about deregulation and simplification, and the AI Act hampers innovation and all this. And this is coming up now. We call it this is called the omnibus. So we will have to deal with that. So instead of implementing the legislation, we will, the majorities here in the House will try to reduce its efficiency. Buying into this narrative that it hampers innovation. So I quoted this thing about Musk, who at a certain point, when Grok said the major risk to the world is disinformation, he wrote on X, we're going to fix that in the morning, and he did. And in the morning, the biggest risk was low fertility, which for someone coming from Germany really is very concerning, because that was the ideology in the 1930s. And the minister said, well, no, but actually these models are getting better and better, and they're so incredibly accurate. So it's just a question of time, and we will be fine. So there is still an amazing lack of awareness on how bad this is getting, and this is really, really frustrating. On the copyright issue, I think that is interesting, and there are meetings going on around liability and copyright. So there's an own initiative report being written in this House on copyright. This is quite interesting, because here we have politically a part of the House that wants to get rid of the Article 4 exception. It's a little bit tricky, because the digital rights activists at the time advocated for that exemption. Because at the time, there wasn't the awareness that would be exploited by a few big tech companies. The idea was to make the knowledge of the world available to everybody. So I think we need to find a political solution how to get over that and work together. At the time, there were the publishers were one camp and the digital rights activists were the other one. Mm-hmm. And I think now we're all on the same side. We just haven't realized yet how to do that politically. But I think the copyright avenue is really interesting, because it's a way to get more conservative actors on board, because this is what the publishers are fighting for. So this is something I really see, and I think we should really work on that. If I may just make another remark on the publishers, and that was a question that I wanted to ask to Maria, but you might answer that later. The publishers are scared, because they are seeing this, that they might be losing their autonomy in the next 6 to 12 months. They see the click-through rates dropping, plummeting. But what really frustrates me is they're not coming and saying, implement the legislation you have, change the algorithms. How can we build new technology? They're not really doing that. What they say is, well, we want prominence. That means we want our content up on the first search side. We don't care about anyone else. We just want our media outlets to be seen. And we want liability. That's a question you asked before, to be seen as publishers. So we want liability. But liability is for illegal content. I mean, how do you do it for information? Disinformation is not illegal in Europe, and it's very difficult to make it illegal. I don't think it's a good idea, because it's dictators who are going to use that. So my feeling is a little bit, there's a lot of different communities who are harmed by this tax surveillance model, but every one of them, and the publishers and journalists, I have to say that particularly, are just fighting for a very, very little fix, a very small piece. And that fix is going to come and make it worse. This is what we are seeing. So the question I would like to give a little bit back to the room and maybe to the panel is, how do we convince publishers in particular, who are very powerful people, because, they decide what public opinion sees, to jump into this battle and to fight for innovation integrity as a whole, attacking the big tech surveillance model and coming on board in this big fight, rather than fighting only for liability, only for prominence, only for exception number 38 and the European Media Freedom Act, these little things. How do we make them, find their courage and join the big fight? Thank you.
Who on the panel would like to take that question? Mira.
Thank you. Speaking of the community, as Maria has noticed, it doesn't come on its own. It needs to be facilitated, and chairs are behaving today. So what we've done since 2018 with a lot of colleagues from different organizations, including Article 19 in this room, we have created a very informal but a very active working group of freedom of expression, digital rights, journalism associations and unions and syndicates, some of the publishers and other groups to work together to inform the Commission, the parliamentarians, and anyone who wants to listen about where those common points and where is that common ground that we can find. And actually, as you say, when there were some previous negotiations, publishers on one side, digital rights activists on the other, journalism unions somewhere in the middle, I think what we have managed is to get to the point where we understand who is arguing for what and for what reasons. And I think that has brought us to be much more effective when it came to European Media Freedom Act, that has been adopted with much more strong position and support from all these groups. So I think that there is a progress there. It took us 7 years. A World Association of newspapers and news publishers just had a change of leadership, and a Danish publisher is going to be a CEO. Denmark is the only country where the publishers actually came together to negotiate with their companies as a group. And so this is an interesting model, and you're saying that maybe that could be an interesting way forward. They are also starting some of the lawsuits when the AI companies are not following through. So this is something that I think is very important, and I hope that that watering down of legislation is not going to mean that some of the major articles that are regulating assessment of risk and harms related to freedom of expression in the DSA, and also European Media Freedom Act, and different articles, especially relationship between journalism media organizations and big tech, very large online platforms. Those are Articles 18 and 19, and we are waiting for guidance now from the Commission, and that's one of the things where we're really hoping that there will be a strong leadership and bold action from the Commission to make that kind of crossover between DSA and EMFA happen. So that's...
Yeah, and that, 99% of Danish publishers are part of that collective that's run by Karen Ronde, who is fantastic. And I might also just add to that, one of the things that the Center for Journalism and Liberty is doing is to bring together some of the largest publishers in the world and the tiniest, little GFMD members, Article 19 members, like little tiny publishers from all over the world, all over the United States, and journalism support groups, anyone who is basically interested in learning about fair compensation models and strategy. And we found that learning across that, and then also we have another group that brings together for-profit and non-profit and big and little media representatives who have been on the opposite side of legislative battles out in public to come together to learn from each other, figure out and debate and come to agreement before we get out in public. And we found that's been very successful in terms of learning what's happening around the world, especially when it comes to how big tech is using its lobbying power to divert regulation or manipulate the process. So, it seems like but it takes time, it takes learning, but there is a slow, I think, interest in building that community. Wikipedia people, it's a community, but it also seems to be a very unique community. Do you have anything that you think, your guys' experience of building community to create this really amazing alternative to big tech that you could give to our community?
Well, it would be very arrogant if I suddenly start giving advice to journalists and to media how to do their job. I think they know much better than us what to do.
Right, but community building, right? You guys have certainly journalists have a role in community building, et cetera, but you guys have built a global community of people who are, I've edited Wikipedia a few times, who are just contributing their knowledge, their experience, their expertise, And you have a community of all these volunteer editors that have turned Wikipedia in from, when I was a kid, a source that you're absolutely not allowed to ever cite, to a foundational data source for the large language models that are underlying our entire information system.
Well, yes, I think what makes these projects live and thrive is that everybody gets a space to express themselves, and everybody, even, it's not actually one big community, it's thousands of small communities. And while in the larger languages, so in German and English, it's plateauing or even going down, we see that there is this huge need, especially for people from smaller languages, to come together to build a knowledge, sort of a mass of knowledge around their languages and their communities. And just creating space for this helps a lot. The second thing is that, and we do get a lot of problems, the Wikimedia Foundation as a service provider gets a lot of problems for this in courts, is when our volunteers get dragged in front of a court, and we do get a lot of lawsuits similar to journalists, so slap suits against Wikipedians is a thing. The Wikimedia Foundation goes and tries to defend them. So we have a fund to also defend them, and that also really helps sort of knit this together, because then people know, yeah, we're not alone. This is not just a hypothetical online thing. If I ever get dragged in front of a court regardless whether it's in Saudi Arabia or in Portugal, because actually in the EU we have a lot of issues as well, there will be somebody there to protect me. So it cannot remain only online. We also need to physically meet and to talk to each other and to be together.
Great point. And just one other small question. I mean, it feels like, okay, Wikipedia has this volunteer model, and part of that is because it is this public resource. But it seems like we're seeing big tech platforms try to co-opt that model, right? Oh, let's do community notes where, our billion-dollar companies use the unpaid labor of our users that are, basically required to use our platforms to reach their audiences to do the labor of fact-checking that we're no longer willing to pay for or design our systems to mitigate against. I don't know, does that...
Yes, I'm really torn about community notes, because on one hand, I really dislike that they essentially created it to save money. On the other hand, and I'm not talking about the platform it started from, but giving communities a bit more power, a bit more agency to decide what's happening from our perspective. That's generally not a bad thing. I mean, we definitely think that self-governing communities is something worth protecting and worth developing on the internet. My big question is, can self-governing communities really be independent and thriving on platforms that essentially have different interests than are their own? So this is where I see the conundrum. So, yeah.
Yeah, great point. Did you want to comment on this, Alexandra?
Yeah, just very briefly, because I'm very passionate about community notes. I think Maria Ressa explained very well what happens to women who engage in the internet. And how many women are there still activists, journalists, scientists, politicians on X? People leave those communities because they're not inclusive. So the community that stays there absolutely is not representative of the population of the world and of the people who would like to communicate there. So having, to be very blunt, and I'm sorry for saying that, but white, rich males deciding what are facts and what are not facts, this is absolutely unacceptable.
Excellent point. Thank you for raising that, in addition to the other points. Quinn, we're in an era, so we've worked together for, many, many years, probably as long as Maria and I have. And we have a human rights framework, we have international treaties and all of these normative frameworks, and they're very important. But we are in my opinion, an era of normative destruction, right? We have, we've seen that self-regulation is insufficient with big tech. We see that, democratic norms are under threat. The U.S. is no longer playing any sort of effort to be a normative leader. Are human rights frameworks enough? Are we going to have to look at other toolkits, or can you leverage some of the hard power of competition bodies, antitrust enforcement, where we have actually seen some efforts to mitigate the power of big tech?
You stole my word, Courtney. Because actually, I've been actually saying for a number of years that we have to move towards hard power. I think one of the things as an American we have found this year is that the norms are only as good as the people enforcing them. Norms are often a form of soft law that we talk about, but there is hard law, and we need to be using the hard law that's in place to actually fight for the principles that are actually underpinning those laws. That's why it's so important that I was speaking with some people like, look, one of the things that in the freedom of expression community and in the digital rights community we're really concerned about, as we've been talking about, is that Europe will lose its nerve on the DSA, DMA, and AI Act, right? And the Media Freedom Act as well. And it was put to me bluntly by a politician from the Netherlands that, look, at the end of the day, we want to keep our sovereignty over this, but we care about NATO more. And that's actually the trait. It's not the cars. They're literally putting it in terms of we don't want to move away from the NATO alliance if this is the thing that's going to break it. And I think that's a grand exaggeration of it, but that is the dialogue that's happening. So we are concerned that because the hard laws have power, that's what they're going for, and that's what they're going to ask to be traded away. And some of the things that are being discussed about, we need to be more business friendly and business savvy and all of that. That's definitely an avenue of attack because they know that that's an avenue of doing it. I mean, we need to use competition law in order to try and regulate and move these things in. But I think there's another danger with all of this as well. There's the conflation of the securitization agenda with media freedom and artificial intelligence right now that is actually really, really dangerous. And we need to be, I think, aware of that. And it has to do with resourcing and some of the issues that you that you talked about when you talked about the Russian and Chinese disinformation online. One of the ways that we hear the idea of information integrity being discussed a lot in Europe is through the lens of securitization. We have to defend democracy. We need to defend our information ecosystems, which I completely agree with. But when you talk to governments, those conversations are happening by the people that are the funding for that, let me say, is coming from the people that are interested in counter-propaganda and are coming from a securitization mindset. They're not coming from a democracy is based on free-flowing ideas and ensuring that we have the right people talking about the right things at the right time. And when you layer AI and the monopolies of AI on top of that, and actually you know that, I mean, you're talking about how Palantir is there. Sidebar for me, the country or the company is literally named after an evil orb that corrupts everyone who touches it. Like, they could not be trolling us harder with what their ultimate goal is in the world. And yet, they're everywhere. Palantir is literally everywhere. They're speaking with Tesco. They're speaking with security people. They're trying to take over from Google in terms of controlling the world's information. But you layer that and that monopoly, that data monopoly, on top of the fear of the securitization agenda and the need for people to find resources to actually get media out there, it could go really bad really quickly. And so that's one of the things I think we need to be very aware of and not find ourselves slipping easily into trying to justify media and democracy through the lens of security.
That's such a great point, and it really reminds me of, what was it, like 2014 and the countering violent extremist agenda and how that then took over the media development agenda. And it was, this short-lived but really problematic reorientation. I want to open up the panel for questions and comments from the audience. So if you have anything to say, and I'd love to maybe first, if you don't mind, Maria, I'd love to get your thoughts on kind of what you've heard up here. Does it resonate? Anything missing? Just your reflections on the conversation.
Well, first, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I forgot to say this with Alexandra. Thank you for holding the line. Thank you, Quinn. I mean, you guys are reflections on it. I think we laid out the problems. And now what we need to do is, I would love to know, what do you want us to do now that we could collectively do? One, that's my question. But so I came from counterterrorism, and I do know that it was, countering violence. All of that happened right before. And it's interesting because a lot of the folks doing propaganda came from this. But I'm not doing propaganda. I guess what I'm saying is, I think this may be a time where we need to get both the funding and the communities to work together for the right direction. And coming together is far more important than the things that used to divide us. And on the last one, radical collaboration for news organizations. Holy cow, I don't know how else, right? Because we are all on the same side and we will not survive. We didn't even talk media consolidation in the United States. But this will happen here, Europe, hello, right? So yes, so what would you like us to do? What is possible right now that would move the needle?
Right. Just to link to what you were saying about the lobbying activities, and I'll start with the numbers. So I want to go into numbers and what European Union can do in that sense. Of course, implementation of laws, hopefully not watered down. But you mentioned that, or Maria, that lobbyists of big tech in Brussels spend anywhere between 100 and 150 million per year on lobbying around these laws. That's much more than what European Union invests in journalism, both internally and externally. And it's very hard to get those numbers precisely because there are so many instruments and they're so different. But that's one of the topics that we really need to discuss. And also that money that you said 20 to 50 million, we hope it's around 80 when you bring together different adjacent revenue streams. Not only funds journalism for those investigations, but also the whole freedom of expression and policy community. And so there are very few organizations that are capacitated properly to really address the size of the problem and to provide that kind of input into the different policy making. On the AI, at the moment, around 70 and 80% of the research is coming from AI labs owned by corporations or funded by corporations. So that's that part where civil society as a community has a huge disbalance in power where those voices can be heard. So then we have one thing that we haven't mentioned, and it's in the European Media Freedom Act that we really need to make sure is protected. It's public service media. That's the only place in the world, and most of them that are functional and not very captured are in Europe. They receive from different funding sources around $50 billion or a bit less in euros per year. That's the only solid and healthy pot of money for production of different content pieces that exist. And they're under attack exactly according to that model, Maria, that you have explained around influence operations. And I think that Europe and all of us should think together how to create that nerve strategy for defending public service media. Once the funding for them is gone, there's absolutely nothing to replace that. So that's one thing that we can do, and we need to do it urgently. Then the final thing is on the multi-annual financial framework that's being negotiated at the moment. We have 3 buckets. Our small media advocacy group has created a letter that we will be sending next week. We have 3 buckets that are relevant for journalism in what is now a draft of the multi-annual financial framework. One is Agora EU program that is almost double in size to what it has been. However, even if the proportion of the media funding stays the same or is it increased, it doesn't get us to that 150 million per year. And so, and that usually is implemented in very small chunks and ends up in grants with media organizations that are very small, sometimes 5, 7, in best cases, 50,000 euros. That is not going to solve the problem that we are in. So that's the first bit. So great for European Commission to increase that part of the budget, but we really need to make sure that the mechanisms are not for the 7 years ago problems, but that they're actually adjusted to what we need to resolve the problems that we talked about today. There is also Global Europe, external action budgets, and we want that to really have designated budget lines to support democracy and journalism outside of Europe where it's important. Finally, there is Europe Competitiveness Fund, where media hasn't been mentioned specifically. And yesterday, Zuzana was mentioning about that we look at media from only two perspectives in terms of money: grants, usually small and short term, or VC capital investment. What we really need is to treat media as social enterprises that they are. And we need more impact investing. That's patient capital, and that's turning media to what they can be, a really good businesses, but without the pressure of having high profits that are impossible at the moment. And so there is that thing on the infrastructure, of course. Zuzana said yesterday, infrastructure is not going to get funded by small grants. So those mechanisms and vehicles are what is missing, and I think we need them urgently, and that's something that Europe definitely can and must do. And finally, on the global stage, Europe needs to lead in two processes at the moment. One is WSIS, World Summit on Information Society, where all of this is reflected globally. And the other is a finance for development process. So Europe has led in designing civil commitments, where there is a sentence that to stop illicit financial flows, the countries will support investigative journalism and civil society organizations, and Europe needs to lead there. Thank you.
Well, that is quite a list. I hope someone was taking notes, because you just got your list of what you can do.
I have the list.
Mira will share the list with you. I would also add to that, the U.S. has seen massive cuts to public media, and I think one of the big concerns there is what happens if those broadcast licenses come up and they can't afford to renew them, and then they will never get them back, and they'll be bought by right-wing nationalist owners, and that's really disturbing. But I think, we also have to make sure that as part of this solution, we see public policy as infrastructural, right? None of this public funds to support media is going to go anywhere if we don't have a fair playing field, right? If you've got the monopolies taking 30% from the app stores, 30% from digital advertising, 30% from, everything else, stealing the content to create their replacing, their products that replace them. So I would encourage us to think about public policy also as infrastructure, and similarly needing that long-term investment, because I think most of the people in this room do public policy work, and it is a lot of work, right? To figure out who you need to talk to, write the reports, do the advocacy, understand how these processes work. And every little process you just mentioned takes time and energy to involve in. So, I think also the return on investment to journalism is something, if you haven't, I think it's Global Investigative Journalism Networks. They have a page where they actually show the billions of dollars that have been recovered, which is a great ROI, and would be really interesting to think about, well, how could some of that money go back to the journalists that actually help recover it? Like in the US, we have a whistleblower fund. Why not do something like that for journalism, where if you help uncover malfeasance, then you would get some of the return funds or whatever. We don't need to ideate new things here. But Maria, I wanted to go to you because you told me that you wanted me to come back to you and to make another comment.
First, I think the one last thing we haven't mentioned is how the online advertising is like a mafia, right? Literally, it's like a mafia, and they take bits and pieces out. And I think that I was going to ask you what can be done about it. But the last part you brought up, that the EU is working on a public information tech stack. We're open source. You can have it. Like literally, we just wanted to prove it can work.
No, I would love you to come to Germany and many other countries to talk to publishers and show that tech stack. because I know they're discussing it. I know that people now in Brussels working on a tech stack that could also work for media. But I think it's early stage. And if you came to Germany, talk to the right people, present the tech stack, really how it works, I think that would be what would really be amazing. And exactly what you said, it's the global south here leading. So I think that would be absolutely excellent. On online advertising, I've been working on this for 6 years. We had really, in the DSA, we had this really, really big battle to try to get rid of surveillance advertising. And in the end, the only thing we managed to, I think we had a big success that everybody started talking about it because it was not in the Commission proposal for the DSA, and we managed to make it really big, have the big debates around it, and a lot of people, we raised enormous awareness on how toxic that system is. We did not manage to ban it. What we did manage in the DSA was to have an article that says you can't have sensitive data according to GDPR categories. That is religious or faith, for example, political affiliation, health data. You know, when you're depressed or anxious, the platforms are not supposed to store that in their advertising profile they have on you. And minus data, also very important. The only problem is now we have that article, and the Commission says, well, you know, it is enforced because on Facebook you can't do your targeting in Europe anymore, saying, you know, I want Muslims, I want Jews, I want Christians. But Facebook, if your client send you an email saying, well, we're not allowed to do this anymore, but, you know, come and talk to us because we have ways to go around this. And the Commission is not investigating it. The Commission is not enforcing it. And this morning I was in the Internal Market Committee, which is competent for the Digital Services Act, and we had matter there, because now we have a regulation on transparency and targeting of political advertising. And I always thought it's very difficult to distinguish political advertising from general content, but anyway, the Commission wanted to do that, so we have this regulation. And matter is outright refusing to apply it in Europe, and therefore they don't take any political advertising. That also means any issue-based advertising, which also means that the campaigning organization, the NGOs, can't reach their people anymore because Meta just doesn't accept that. And what basically the Meta representative said this morning was, well, first of all, it's so difficult to get consent because for political advertising they have to ask for specific consent, and they don't want to do that. And it was very clear. And then they said, well, and then, you know, our customers can't really target their audiences anymore. And what he was basically hiding is that they're not able to do that because they have sensitive data and the rest of the data in the same part. There was a document that leaked, a memo that leaked a few years ago from Facebook engineers that said, well, we're not abiding by GDPR. We can't even distinguish that data. And I think that's one of the reasons they want to do it. So this, again, we have the legislation. We don't have an outright ban, but we have a number of provisions that if somebody really went to investigate and see what they're doing and implement that ban, this would all fall apart completely. This is why I was so happy we managed to get into that. It's a lack of political will. Just one last thing. I think one thing that is important, that if we build new platforms, you know, so far, like in the digital rights activist scene, it was always, it needs to be publicly funded. We can't use advertising. Advertising is total poison. I personally, and I know this is not popular, I don't think we can have a better information and networking ecosystem that is attractive for the majority of people. You know, in Europe, I don't want a few thousand people on that. I want 450 million people who are able to use that network. I don't think you can do that without advertising. We just need a better business model, and that is something that's super important to work on, having a better business model that uses advertising in a very responsible way, without surveillance, without toxic algorithms. But in order to compete with meta platforms, with Google, with AI, we need attractive platforms that are easy to use, to have a great user surface, a great user experience. And in order to do that, you need to pay people to build that. And therefore, I think it's super important, apart from the technology, also to come up with better business models.
Well, and also, I mean, advertising prevents capture, right? If you have a bunch of advertisers, it's much harder for any one interest to capture, right? Okay, I want to go to Q&A. So if you have a question, can you please raise your hand and I'll come to you. And just, I want to point out, like, I do think the DMA has existing rules that could be used in terms of separating out data sets, you know, preventing cross-platform usage, and, like, let's use them. Okay, Julia.
Thanks a lot for the conversation. I wanted to follow up on this point on that you mentioned, Alexandra Gies, on the prominence bit, because if we want to make sure that public interest journalism is available and accessible online, and even though we know that all these referrals go down via social and search, at the same time, I think the latest digital news Reuters report said that still like more than half of the people access news, actual news, through social and search. So I wanted to get all of your views on how do we square this circle of saying there can be short-term mitigation measures like prominence, like visibility policies, like must carry, like all of these ideas that are out there that also some countries have attempted with more or less success to make sure that public interest journalism is visible online. But then also we have this long-term vision of rebuilding, right? And what Maria Ressa pointed to, we have to build this healthy alternative without capture. So how do we square this, and how do we work with states? And we struggle with this at the OSCE, where we work on this. How do we tell states, should they do this short-term policies that might lead to, how Quinn, you phrase it, around the survival of media now, right? But then we also don't want to undermine the long-term vision. So it would be really interesting to get your thoughts on how to square this circle. Thanks.
Yeah, maybe you want to give the floor to Mira as well. Maybe we might have different answers. I don't know how to square this. This is super difficult. My experience is here in the House that every time you get some kind of short-term fix, the trade-off is confirming the basic business model. And you mentioned the EMFA, the European Media Freedom Act, which is a great piece, except for that provision, the must carry, because that is it's a gate wide open for disinformation, because it basically gives the companies, the platforms, an excuse not to moderate really, really bad pieces of disinformation. A similar example is now there was like the strategy to let's focus on minors because the broader public understands the harms on minors. No, we're having an age assurance debate in the parliament, which will end up exactly with the meta position. And on top of that, age assurance, which basically means the platforms will be allowed to capture our kids' biometric data, and nobody knows where is this going to go. So if you now have a 15-year-old who gets a facial recognition done in order to access Meta, what's happening to that data? They will be able to follow that kid until it's 60 or something. And that is a little bit the experience when we focus on a small fix, like prominence, for example. You confirm the business model. And this is what publishers are telling me. They say, well, there's nothing we can do about, the Google control of the online advertising model. There's nothing we can do about that they decide what kind of content. There's not much we can do about AI. Let's just have this one little thing. And I think we need to change that mindset, because there's so many communities out there who want to fight against these harms. And the ways to fix this, it's very easy. I mean, touch the algorithms, the surveillance model, advertising model. And we have the Google case right now that nobody has mentioned, the Google ad tech case that we have in the US, we have in Europe. So let's all stand behind that. And the publishers basically put it forward. So let's speak up about that. Let's put pressure. If all the publishers really talked about this widely, and they're very reluctant to do so because they're feeling they're pushing their own interest. But, you need to do reporting on that. You need to explain this is not some kind of bizarre antitrust case and it's something for competition experts. This is about having free media. And they should be talking about it. So I think we really need to attack that business model, and publishers could be such a great help if they didn't feel, this is inevitable. Big tech has just won, and we just need to find a solution. And I think one problem with the publishers is that some of them, in each country, there's one or two who really are successful with that model, who team up with Google, and I don't want to make names. Everybody knows whom I'm talking about, at least for my country. And so they're split. So I loved what you said about Denmark, that they stay together. I don't think that in Germany that's going to work. But this is what happens in the end. When you go for the small fixes, the biggest one will be okay, but everybody else is going to die. And that is the big risk.
Yeah, and I mean, we definitely see that with some of the small publishers being bought off with like Google News Initiative or like a few $1,000s. I think they're also worried about retaliation, right? If they speak out. And any other questions from the floor? I'm going to go here just because he didn't ask already. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, hi, Oliver Monaco from the International Press Institute. I'm really interested in. Yesterday we had a long debate about the relative merits of the DSA. Alexandra, you're obviously a big proponent of it, but you also said something quite interesting yesterday about the moment politicians are on the defensive, they've lost the argument. So the question is the DSA sellable to the public? And if so, how? Because I see it as it's a very complex law. It's a very finely balanced law. In many ways, it's a very beautiful law, but it must be a very, very hard sell. And I'm not sure what the public, most of the public obviously don't even know it exists, but those who do know that it exists are probably those who are listening to Trump and the populist politicians who see it presented as an instrument of oppression rather than a force for good. So how do we win that debate? And if we can't win that debate, should the EU ditch it and actually focus on the DMA, which historically, using antitrust legislation, is the one tool that has historically been super effective whenever we've had these problems in the past?
I mean, that was to you. I think that was to you.
Well, I mean, there's no contradiction between using DSA and DMA at the same time. It's two different units, so we just should do both. And I think we need to do both because, these are big companies we're up against. This is power, so we definitely need both instruments. You're totally right that the DSA is a really difficult sell. When we did the DSA and we had the final agreement, which was interesting, I got calls from like the US, Japan, Australia, Brazil, and very, very few from my own country, Germany. It was just like one German television. And then I said, oh, yeah, but we just do a quick thing because the day after was the elections in France. And that was the big story from Europe. Nobody cared. So we need to build stories. We need to build storytelling around it. I read out the things on Article 34 and 35 to you today because you are the experts. When I go back to my constituency, I talk about the threats of disinformation, and I take an example from their community. Something they have already heard. The latest hoax, and you heard this, or scams. That's very powerful. Or local elected politicians like municipal councillors, they are really the target of hate in a way that's incredible. So you talk to them about hate online. That's something they find really interesting. And then you have a foot in and you can explain it. I talked a couple of weeks ago, we have a very interesting person in my country. He's a doctor, a medical doctor. And when he was like 40 or something, he ditched his whole medical career and he started as a comedian. And he's a great comedian. And now he's basically a science communicator. So he goes on TV and he explains science, especially medical science, in a very funny way. And now he's being targeted on meta platforms by AI scams, people who pretend, clips that pretend to be him and him recommending, like you said, you told the same story. And so you see him recommending, I don't know, some kind of medicines and powders and strange stuff. And people buy that stuff and then it's ineffective and they realize they've been victim of a scam. And they write him hate emails. So he's being threatened by these people who have been scammed by the, actors that are amplified by the platforms. And so he's doing a TV show around this, and he's telling the story. And he's a smart guy, so he's not using his personal story, but he came to me and tried to understand how the platforms work, and he's doing all the work to understand this and how the DSA works. So this is the kind of storytelling we need. Start from the harm, with something that people can really relate to, and then explain what the system behind is, and ask people to put pressure on politicians. And then it's our job, now it's the Commission's job as lawmakers, we did our job, to implement that. I think that is the way to get around the fact we definitely should not ditch the DSA, because at least, we're the continent that has a legal basis to tackle this. We just need to create the public will, and I think it's through storytelling and the narratives that we can do that.
Brief thought from Mira?
Yes, just to finish with a shout out to Maria Donde, who is sitting just there and who is actually implementing parts of the DSA as the Ireland digital coordinator, and trying to figure out also how she will do that with European Media Freedom Act. So there are things that are moving. We had also Thomas Hughes from Appeal Center Europe, who's also using that, and for the first time we have a mechanism where organizations can appeal. And finally, Julia, who was asking a question, has just published a very good recommendation list in the shape of a report for the OSCE Freedom of the Media Representative Office. So a lot of people who are working on all these things, trying to find solutions, and going back to Maria's point, collaboration, and I think we can move things.
Yes, and I will also just, in addition to that report on the must-carry issue, Anya Schifrin and I did a little examination about what would that mean on digital platforms because of this concern. So, it's something we need to look into a broader range of policy solutions. So, thank you guys so much. I really appreciate this great discussion. Please join me in thanking our panel, and you can go down and then. Oh, just stay. Okay, and Barry Lynn is the Executive Director of the Open Markets Institute, and will just provide a few closing remarks to this panel and to the Future of Democracy event. Over to you, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And on the thing, it said I would have 10 minutes. I'm not going to take 10. I'll take 6 or 7, because I know you guys are at the end of your a long 2 days of conversation. We all know that the printing press enabled a new model for sharing information, for debate, for self-illumination. It didn't happen all at once. In 1620, a Dutch geographer invented a press that dramatically sped up printing. It made printing much cheaper. One result was a fantastic, new, glorious ferment of ideas and argument. Until this point, ideas remained largely subject to control by the state, by the church. Even the Enlightenment, powered by the first generation of printing, took place mainly among elites, behind the walls and doors of castles and villas. Within 20 years, this new Dutch press, this people's press, had enabled revolution, intellectual, political, social, spiritual revolution. As the poet John Milton wrote in his incredibly important essay, Areopagitica, the censors had brought a famine upon our minds. The goal of censors, he wrote, is that we shall know nothing but what is measured to us by their bushel. Thanks to the new presses, writing was much harder to control. It was now the people, Milton wrote, who are disputing, reasoning, reading, inventing, discoursing, even to a rarity and admiration, things never before discoursed or written of. It is here, 4 centuries ago, that we see the birth of our world, our way of thinking, our way of making community, our way of seeking, our way of dreaming. 4 centuries ago, the beginning of modern printing. This is the beginning of our modern dreaming, seeking, problem-solving democratic mind. Today, in America and in democracies around the world, when we measure our freedom by the measures that were created 4 centuries ago, are books available? Are newspapers available? Can I, as a writer, write what I want? Can I, as a reader, find what I want? What we find today is the greatest choke pointing of control over what we read and see, over our thinking and dreaming in 400 years. The greatest constriction on our intellects, our souls, our dreams in 400 years. I don't need to go into depth on this because over the last 2 days, we've heard many terrifying stories. The overarching picture, today, the information system that for 4 centuries has supported our system of liberal democracy is still above the waves. As we stand on the deck, we can see the faces of our friends, the familiar stars and headlands that have guided us for so long. We still retain our liberal and democratic ways of seeing and thinking, but the bow of our ship is underwater. We are mere moments away from darkness, ignorance, servility, political collapse, economic collapse, systems collapse, information collapse, as Maria made so eloquently clear. Over the last 2 days, we have discussed in depth the nature of this crisis, the source of the crisis, the tools to solve the crisis, the regulatory principles we historically use to structure our information systems. I truly believe we know what to do and we know how to do it. We also know why to do it, because if we rebuild an open, stable, democratic, trustworthy information system, we can have everything we want. The lesson of the past 400 years, the lesson distilled by Milton, when we use our power to distribute their power, this makes the individual person more free to create prosperity and abundance and security and resilience, to innovate and build what is new. Fix this problem, this information crisis, and we can fix absolutely every threat that we now face today. Every threat. Free thinking, free acting people can master every threat we face today. So the first thing I want to do is thank all of the speakers who carried us to this point of knowing what to do and how to do it, especially Maria Ressa. I don't have many personal heroes. Maria is one. Margrethe Vestager, Mario Monti, Michael McGrath, Jonathan Cantor, Jamie Raskin, and Cory Booker. These were great talks that we've heard the last couple of days. Alexandra Gysa, one of Europe's true leaders. One of the true leaders in this moment. One of the few people who are out there fighting the right fight. Every one of you in our audience, every other speaker. I also want to thank the people who worked on this conference, because I'll tell you, putting on a 2-day transnational, transatlantic conference ain't easy. You know, our teams at Open Markets and Article 19 did an absolutely fantastic job. All of you, all the members of both of these teams, did a fantastic job. I have never been more proud of any event that we have hosted. Hey, thank you. So we know what to do, and we know how to do it. Almost sounds like a Sex Pistols song. Which leaves, what does this leave? We got to go out and goddamn do it. The last couple of days, many people have asked me why I am an optimist. I am an optimist because I truly believe the great majority of people in our democratic societies are still rational enough to choose wisely between nothing and all, between hell and a dignified life of true intellectual, political, and spiritual freedom, which is the choice we face today, hell or freedom. We know what to do, and we know how to do it, and I'll end by quoting Maria Ressa. Stop thinking, stop debating, stop cowering, start moving, then keep going. So anyway, thank you all.
Before we get to the great things of the evening, there's one more person I really need to thank from the bottom of my heart. He's already know I'm looking at him as the leader of my team who made it possible that we're here today in Parliament against all odds of the parliamentary administration, Florian Ockenfuss. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We'll be starting cocktail hour out there shortly, so I hope you'll join us. Thank you again. Thank you to everyone. And Maria, if you can come up, we'll do a group fixture. Thanks, everyone.
Get to the end of it.